It goes without saying that there are a lot of ways to write a Batman plot. You can write Batman as a film noir-esque detective, a tragedy, a character study, along with a lot of other ways. Each incarnation has their own take on the plot. So instead of synthesizing every way there is to write a Batman story down to a single reductive method, in part 1 I'm going to go over how to write a Batman story from the perspective of Batman the Animated Series. I'll use the perspective/method I outlined in part 1 to analyze how the episode Two-Face creates one of the show's greatest episodes in part 2, and proceed to fix one of Batman's most disliked episodes, Prophecy of Doom, in part 3. And I'll be using Batman the Animated Series and Batman interchangeably. Part 1. How to write a Batman plot. Even within Batman the Animated Series, there are a lot of ways to form a narrative. However, the majority of popular episodes fall into the vein of villain stories. Stories where the focus is on the tension between a villain and Batman. These are the plots I want to write. Now, a lot of content has been made on how to write Batman the character. So, in the way of adding something new to the conversation, I want to outline one way to write a Batman plot without discussing Batman as a character. Past this point, I'm going to limit talk of Batman's character to a minimum. Because, while embracing Batman's character is critical to any Batman story, the plots don't revolve around Batman as a character. They revolve around the villains. In novels, characters are often developed for personality. If you were to describe any character in a novel, you would most likely describe who they are as a person. Whereas in Batman and most superhero stories, characters are often developed for their motives. Think of any character in the Batman universe. Chances are, if you were to summarize them, you would retell their backstory and how that motivates them, and then move on to describing their personality. The motives are the core of the character. Batman's parents were killed, so he vowed to clean up the city without killing. Mr. Freeze, while trying to cure his terminally ill wife, fell victim in a lab accident and has since needed his suit and has vowed to cure his wife. Batman's characters are often defined by their motives, and motives almost always derive from a mishap which leads to a vow. The mishap and vow are also usually tied to a key trait or philosophical outlook on life that the audience can sympathize with. Sympathy adds emotional complexity to the story. The best plots of Batman are the plots that use the key trait, mishap, and vow to shape the narrative. The episodes Feet of Clay, Part 1 and Part 2 are a perfect example of this. The key trait of Clayface, first known as Matt Hagen, is that he will act at all costs to his well-being. The mishap is Matt Hagen uses a compound called Renew U, pronounced Renew U, supplied to him by Roland Daggett to mold his face into whatever form the acting requires. However, when Hagen is caught trying to steal a large quantity of Renew U from Daggett, a vat of Renew U is poured onto him, turning him into Clayface, at which point he vows to enact revenge on Daggett. The conclusion of Feet of Clay sees Batman play a tape of Hagen's roles on a television array, causing Clayface, who's haunted by a lost past, to become overcome with emotion and fatally fall to the floor. However, it's later revealed that his collapse was just an act. Clayface left a small shell of clay and got away. Clayface's key trait, that he would act at all costs, motivates the climax and twist ending. The key trait motivates the story, and the mishap, Hagen's transformation into Clayface, is how the twist ending is carried out. The mishap and key trait guide the plot. That's why the episode works. However, there is more than just a well-designed villain to a Batman plot. Frank Miller, author of The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One, puts it as such. My dream would be to make it much smaller, to lose the toys and focus more on the mission, and to use the city a great deal more. Because he's got a loving relationship with the city he's protecting, and unlike Superman, his connection to crime is intimate. It has been ever since his parents were murdered, and he defeats criminals with his hands. I don't think Miller's dream is far off from Batman the Animated Series. However, it's pretty vague. What does Miller mean by use the city? The most obvious way to incorporate the city is through the use of landmarks. Crime Alley, large stadiums, the GCPD, etc. But Gotham is more than a series of places. It's the organized crime that lies beneath, along with all the citizens. Using the city is about incorporating anything that signifies Gotham, anything that gives it the sense that Gotham has its own social, political, and economic ecosystem. Another part of using the city is scope versus scale. Scope is the size of the story, or how encompassing your story is. A large scope would be multiple intertwining stories and a vast array of characters, whereas a small scope would be solely focusing on one character. Generally, Batman works best with a large scope, when there are multiple plots tying together, and the more people/narratives you color, the more you feel the city and its presence, because the people are part of the city. Scale, on the other hand, is the size of the characters. A large scale would be a larger-than-life spy infiltrating a government building in the grandest possible manner, or monsters destroying giant buildings. Their crazy actions are having an impact across the world. A small scale would be characters navigating a relationship, or a character making a video essay on Batman. They aren't doing anything that has much effect outside of their immediate surroundings. Generally, Batman works best with a scale limited to Gotham. Characters don't affect others outside city limits. Don't detract focus from Gotham with other affairs. Miller's second point, focus on the mission, is self-evident. Batman needs to undergo a mission, so the climax feels earned. Batman doesn't just stumble upon the bad guys, he works his way to them. When he does find the villain, focus on how Batman defeats them. He doesn't just punch them, he uses his ingenuity and what he has learned to defeat the villain. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, you need to twist the formula. This is what stops stories from becoming repetitive and disengaging to the audience. Sometimes a twist is a literal twist, like in Feet of Clay. Other times it's a twist on the narrative structure, like in POV, an episode which recounts a gang encounter from 3 different perspectives. While it's not your typical villain story, it's a good example of altering the formula. To recap, the mishap, vow, key trait, and storyline should all intertwine with each other, incorporate the city, focus on the mission, twist the formula. Part 2. Analyzing Two-Face. Quite fittingly, Two-Face was split up into 2 episodes, so there's a lot of information to cover. I'm going to oversimplify my synopsis for time and explain why each portion of the story works on the side of the screen using the key observations. Part 1 of Two-Face deals with attorney Harvey Dent's anger outbursts, as he's running for re-election and trying to imprison Rupert Thorne's gang. Dent has an alternative personality known as Big Bad Harv. When Thorne tries to blackmail Dent by threatening to reveal this side of Dent to the public, Big Bad Harv comes out and a fight results in half of Dent's face being disfigured by chemicals. When Grace, Harvey's fiancée, sees what happened to Harvey, she screams and Harvey runs away. Part 2 takes place 6 months later and deals with a fully formed Two-Face making decisions based on the flip of a coin. Thorne, enraged that Two-Face has been raiding his operations, puts a bounty on Two-Face. Interrupting the conflict between Two-Face and Thorne, Bruce Wayne has a nightmare where Dent asks him why he was unable to save him. Bruce promises to himself that he will save Harvey. Batman then realizes that Two-Face is hitting Thorne's fronts for criminal activity. After stealing a file on Thorne's criminal activity that Two-Face intends to use against Thorne in a court of law, Two-Face sees a wedding shop, flips a coin, and calls Grace. Grace alerts one of Thorne's associates, who has previously approached her pretending to be a police officer, where she's meeting Two-Face. Just as Grace and Two-Face are about to kiss, Thorne arrives and gets the file back from Two-Face. Before Thorne can kill Two-Face, Batman arrives and defeats Thorne's gang. Two-Face flips a coin to determine whether or not Thorne dies, but Batman throws a pile of coins at Two-Face, making him lose his marked coin. Unable to decide, Two-Face rages and along with Thorne is sent to prison. These 2 episodes do just about everything right. Two-Face has a dark mishap when he's blackmailed that results in a sympathetic vow to destroy the Thorne crime empire. In addition, Two-Face's key trait, that he has 2 faces, is a recurring theme in the narrative. Not only do we see duality in Dent's personality and in his use of the coin, but we also see duality in the names of Thorne's operations that Two-Face raids. They're all related to the number 2, as Alfred points out. And we see duality when Thorne's associate pretends to be a police officer when in reality she is a mobster. Two-Face's key trait is weaved into the storyline even when it's not directly tied to Two-Face. This episode also has an incredibly strong connection to the city, as it connects to both organized crime and Gotham politics. And while Batman is rarely on screen, when he is, the focus is on the mission so Batman can find Harvey and Bruce can save him. The 2 big twists on the formula in these episodes are the villain has a significant other, which adds emotional complexity that other episodes lack, and Batman knows the villain and feels responsible for the villain's actions. Two-Face is such a great set of episodes because it utilizes all the key observations. It's also worth pointing out that the key observations can be used to explain why the majority of plot points work so well. There aren't many portions of the plot that can't be explained using the key observations. Part 3. Fixing Prophecy of Doom. Prophecy of Doom is widely disliked by fans, but it can be fixed by a rewrite, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'll try to keep as much of the original episode as I can in my rewrite. And before we continue, I'd like to say that writing is subjective. I'm rewriting this episode in a way that I find more engaging. You may disagree. You may even like the original episode. That's fine. First, a Prophecy of Doom synopsis. Prophecy of Doom starts with a bomb going off on a casino boat. People escape on lifeboats. Later, Ethan, a friend of Bruce, informs Bruce of Nostromos, and how Nostromos correctly predicted that he shouldn't have gone on a gambling cruise. Ethan's daughter, Lisa, explains that she thinks Nostromos is making his prophecies come true, and this is putting Ethan under Nostromos' control. Bruce attends a gathering of millionaires in honor of Nostromos, where Nostromos, after Bruce expresses some skepticism, proclaims Bruce is in danger. Back at the Batcave, Batman uses fingerprints to discover Nostromos' real name is Carl Fowler, a professional actor arrested for petty larceny. The next day, Bruce's elevator is sabotaged, and Batman unsuccessfully chases the saboteur. Then the saboteur is revealed to the audience to be Nostromos' assistant, and we hear Nostromos say,
"Can't you see how his death would have affected the Brotherhood? How vulnerable they would have felt. We could have finally hit them for all they're worth."
Bruce then joins the Brotherhood under the guise that his near-death experience moved him to believe. Lisa is enraged Bruce is falling for Nostromos' plan. Ethan informs Bruce that Nostromos has predicted a great fall, essentially an economic collapse, and has set up a trust fund using the Brotherhood's money as a safeguard. Ethan controls the trust fund. At another Nostromos meetup, Lisa, who's been skeptic throughout, finds Nostromos' assistant controlling Nostromos' levitation with wires. Nostromos passes off the levitation as some divine connection to his followers. Nostromos urges everyone to transfer money to the trust fund, and Lisa is captured. Batman informs Alfred that he contributed a large sum of money to the fund to keep up appearances. Nostromos uses Lisa as a hostage to make Ethan sign papers that would convert the trust fund to gold. Batman arrives to defeat Nostromos and save Lisa in a fight amongst the orrery. Bruce, while talking with Ethan and Lisa, concludes the episode with the Shakespeare quote,
"The fault lies not in the stars, but in ourselves."
There are two big changes I'd like to make to improve this episode. One, change Nostromos' motivation / mishap / vow to make him a better villain. On the side of the screen, I never wrote vow because Nostromos' want to con money from the Brotherhood isn't motivated by anything beyond greed, so I wouldn't call it a vow. Two, incorporate organized crime to fuel the city. The plan is to have Nostromos be manipulated by Rupert Thorne, a crime boss in Gotham. Thorne tells Nostromos who will win sporting events, which Nostromos relays to his followers. The millionaires learn to follow the advice, gamble on the games, and make big wins, which cause big losses at the casinos. Thorne is fixing the games with the hopes that the millionaires gambling will put the casinos out of business, so he can have a gambling monopoly in Gotham. Frustrated with being controlled by Thorne, Nostromos enacts the same plan and tells the millionaires an economic collapse is foreseeable. They need to transfer all their money to the fund. Nostromos' hope is that the money will help him escape Thorne. The climax plays out much the same way, except this time, Thorne is there as well, trying to kill Nostromos for disobeying him. And instead of Batman fighting Nostromos, Batman saves Nostromos from Thorne. This rewrite makes Nostromos a stronger villain by structuring him around the mishap and vow formula. The mishap, which is implied and never shown, is that Nostromos was manipulated by Thorne, and the vow is that he does whatever Thorne says, until the end when the vow changes to wanting to escape Thorne's grasp. These changes make Nostromos more empathizable, as he's given a sympathetic mishap that puts him under psychological pressure. Nostromos' key trait that he can manipulate and brainwash people is incorporated into the mishap, creating a stronger character and incorporating the key trait into the storyline. Additionally, this rewrite incorporates the city, both by intertwining narratives to give a sense of scope, and by giving Gotham an underground crime ecosystem where the gangs aren't just in conflict with other gangs, but other factions of the city, such as the casinos. How I'm going to structure this plot will also push focus onto the mission. Nostromos' plan is apparent from the beginning in the original episode, making Batman's investigation more plot filler than revealing. The added convolutions to the plot of having the mob controlling Nostromos means there is more plot to reveal and more mission for Batman to have. The twist on the formula for this rewrite is that the main villain is a pawn for someone else's evil plan. This twist allows the villain to change their vow from helping Thorne to rejecting Thorne, and for the climax to subvert expectations by having Batman save the villain. Hopefully, the twist, the change of vow, and subversive climax twist the formula enough for the audience to stay engaged. Alright, it's time to structure out the Prophecy of Doom rewrite preserving as many story beats as possible. Open on the same scene, an explosion on a gambling cruise. Except this time we see a set of cloaked men trigger the explosion, such that it results in the injury of a group of football players in Gotham uniforms. The ship goes down and people escape on lifeboats. Later, Ethan informs Bruce how he won big betting against Gotham football. When Bruce and Lisa express concern that Ethan may lose all his money betting so boldly, Ethan confesses that Nostromos has guided him to win every time. Lisa says Ethan only won because Gotham football players were injured from the boat explosion. Batman attends a Nostromos meeting, where Nostromos insists they invest all their money on a sports game. Later, Nostromos' prediction is found to be correct. Batman investigates the lifeboats and finds Thorne's henchmen's fingerprints on a boat with black masks and explosive equipment. He remarks that somehow Nostromos knew Thorne's goons would injure the football players. Batman follows Nostromos to a meeting with Thorne. Thorne manipulates Nostromos, telling him that he only has to put on the disguise a couple more times, and then the casinos will go under and they'll have a monopoly on gambling in Gotham. Nostromos insists he doesn't want to participate, but Thorne interrupts and dismisses him by telling him the next game prediction and that the fixing is going on right now by killing the star pitcher. Batman hurries off to try and save the star pitcher. When Batman leaves, we see Lisa get caught spying on Thorne and Nostromos, so Nostromos captures her. Batman saves the star pitcher's life, however the pitcher is still injured and the game is still fixed. Bruce attends a Nostromos meeting. Nostromos predicts the Great Fall, saying it will set you free from those holding you down, and the trust fund, which Ethan controls, will give you all the financial freedom to escape the chaos. At the casino, Thorne remarks that none of the millionaires have put down a bet. Thorne is told they had a problem with Batman, and he angrily says he has to have a talk with Nostromos. After making the trust fund, Ethan returns to Nostromos' house. Nostromos makes a speech attacking Ethan by explaining how he knew the outcome of sporting games, and how that makes Ethan an accomplice in illicit activity. Nostromos concludes, saying he's finally getting out of his situation, and then uses Lisa as a hostage to make Ethan sign the papers that would convert the trust fund to Nostromos' control. Batman arrives and saves Lisa. However, while fighting Nostromos, Thorne's men arrive and start blasting. As the orrery crumbles, Batman saves Nostromos and Thorne's men get away. Bruce, while talking to Ethan and Lisa, concludes the episode the same way with the Shakespeare quote,
The fault lies not in the stars, but in ourselves.
This is by no means a perfect rewrite. Exploding a boat to injure a couple sports players is melodramatic. Using the gangs to incorporate the city is overdone, and I've included the villain explains entire plot trope a couple times. But I've nonetheless stayed close to the original vision and structure, and have, in my mind, improved upon the original using the key observations set out in Part 1. Unlike the Two-Face episodes, this rewrite puts a strong emphasis on the mission. But like the Two-Face episodes, this rewrite requires a lot of setup to develop the villain, which is hard to pull off in a single episode. Writing a Batman plot is about writing the villain, their key trait, mishap, and vow. The villain guides the narrative, however you also need to focus on Batman's mission, incorporate the city, and twist the formula for a plot to hit home. Thanks for watching.